You're under arrest for misconduct." The words did not echo. They detonated. The ballroom inside the Charleston Officers Club went still, chandeliers trembling above 100 medals and raised glasses. The string quartet froze mid-note. Forks hovered over untouched steak. Every face turned toward me. I stood at the podium in my white uniform, meritorious service citation half read in my hand, when the two military police officers stepped forward. The older one's voice was steady, but not cruel. "Captain Tessa Ward, please come with us." The metal cuffs were cold enough to erase the warmth from my skin. I could feel the fabric of my sleeve pull tight as one officer guided my arm behind me. There was a collective breath across the room, that subtle intake that comes before judgment. My stepmother, Linda Ward, sat in the second row, her pearl necklace gleaming under the chandelier. Her lips curved, not in shock, not in shame, but in satisfaction. She had waited for this moment, sculpted it, rehearsed it. Beside her, my stepsister Madison gasped dramatically, pressing a hand to her chest, but I caught the flash of something sharper in her eyes. There was still a faint bruise along her wrist, a mark from the last time I tried to protect her from her own chaos. The moment stretched. The officer's grip was firm. The photographer's flashes turned the room into a storm of light. Someone whispered my name like it had become a scandal. I could feel the pulse in my throat, too calm to match what was happening. Across the polished floor, Linda rose from her chair. Her voice carried like a gavel. "She deserved it." "She's dangerous!" Gasps broke through the hush. I turned my head slightly, only enough to meet her gaze. She did not look away. In that single look lived every year of her quiet campaign years, of polite dismissal, of whispered corrections, of poisoned praise. Madison shifted beside her, performing panic with practiced ease. She reached toward me. For one brief second, I thought she would try to help. Instead, she grabbed the front of my jacket. The metal ribbons tore free with a harsh rip. My balance faltered. Her hand twisted. Pain burst through my arm, sharp and electric, as I hit the marble floor. The sound that left me was not a scream. It was a breath forced through teeth, the kind a soldier makes when struck but unbroken. My sleeve darkened where blood met cotton. A waiter dropped a tray somewhere behind me. The crash punctuated the silence. Madison stepped back, pretending horror. Linda gasped on cue. The crowd rippled with confusion, fear, and curiosity, the perfect mixture for humiliation. I looked up from the floor. The chandelier light fractured in my eyes, and through it I saw cameras rising, phones raised high. A voice in the corner said, "Isn't she that officer from Fort Liberty?" Another said, "My God, what did she do?" I did nothing. Nothing but serve. Nothing but survive. But the truth did not matter tonight. Spectacle did. The officers hesitated. The older one looked down at me, apology flickering behind his discipline. "Ma'am, please stand." His tone was respectful. My body obeyed with precision I did not feel. I stood straight, though my arm burned, though humiliation coiled hot under my skin. The room tilted, but I would not. Years of command had trained me to stand while the world collapsed. Linda's voice reached me again. Sweet now false concern dripping over every word. Poor thing. Always thought the rules were for other people. Her words floated like perfume, filling the silence the way poison fills a vein. I met her eyes again. This time, I did not blink. There are moments when silence is not surrender, but signal. I let mine speak for me. The commanding officer on stage tried to restore order. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm." But calm was already dead. I could feel every stare crawling over the torn fabric, the blood, the badge now half detached from my chest. I did not flinch. I did not plead. There is a discipline that lives beyond fear, and it kept me still. When the officers began to escort me toward the double doors, the crowd parted without a word. Heels on marble. The sound was too clean, too measured, too final. Linda's whisper followed me. Even now she thinks she's above the law. My stepsister sobbed into her mother's shoulder, the image of a perfect victim. I knew better. I had seen her rehearse tears before. As we reached the door, the pain in my arm pulsed with each heartbeat, steady and alive. The chandelier above us caught one last glint of my uniform, torn but still white. I thought of the cadets I once taught about integrity. I thought of the phrase I used then: when the world points at you, hold still. Let the truth outlast the noise. That was the moment I remembered who I was. Not a daughter, not a scapegoat. A captain. I straightened my shoulders. My voice, quiet but clear, broke the silence. "You're making a mistake." No one answered, but somewhere behind the lenses and whispers, I felt the truth, waiting, slow, patient, unstoppable. I was 9 when I learned that silence could keep a family from breaking apart. It happened in Beaufort, South Carolina, where the salt air always smelled like memory and the marsh turned gold before sunset. My father, Major Robert Ward, had just remarried after my mother died of heart failure. The woman he chose was Linda Harper, a polished widow who taught Sunday manners like commandments. She came with a daughter, Madison, 2 years older than me, already wearing confidence like perfume. At first, Linda called me sweetheart, brushed my hair, and told everyone how blessed she was to have 2 daughters now. But behind closed doors, her eyes measured everything I did. She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her words were small needles. A soldier's daughter should know her place. My father, always exhausted from deployments, never saw the quiet storms she built. When he came home, she smiled like porcelain. When he left, she turned to me and said, "Your mother spoiled you with softness." I didn't answer. I learned that silence made her leave the room faster. Madison was the kind of girl teachers loved instantly. She smiled in pictures, danced at every recital, and had the kind of charm that made grown-ups believe she could do no wrong. I was the opposite, quiet, deliberate, drawn to things that stayed still. I liked books more than mirrors. I liked rules. I liked the way my father's medals caught light on the mantelpiece. They were proof that discipline could hold chaos together. Linda saw that and called it arrogance. "You think you're better than us because you wear your father's shadow?" she once whispered after dinner, her breath sharp with wine. I wanted to tell her I wasn't better, just trying not to disappear, but I kept silent again. Silence became the safest armor I had. The first time Madison betrayed me, it was almost gentle. We were in middle school. Someone's lunch money went missing. She cried in front of the principal and said she saw me near the teacher's desk. I tried to explain that I was turning in homework. But her tears were too loud. My father was called from base. He looked at me with the same exhaustion he saved for bad reports. "Tessa, did you do it?" I said no. He exhaled, looked down, then said, "Maybe you should apologize anyway. Let's not make this worse." I did. I apologized to keep him from looking at me that way again. Linda put her arm around Madison afterward and said to the principal, "She's been through a lot since her mother died. She didn't mean me." From then on, the pattern never changed. Madison lied. I kept quiet. My father avoided. Linda polished the story until it gleamed. But the silence I thought was peace slowly became permission. By the time I was 16, I could predict every storm. Linda criticized my posture, my grades, the way I folded laundry. Madison began mimicking her tone. Once at dinner, she looked at me and said, "You always think you're right, don't you?" I didn't answer. My father put down his fork and said, "Girls, enough." That was his only line every time, enough. Then silence. Then years. When I graduated high school, I enlisted. It wasn't rebellion. It was escape dressed as duty. My father didn't protest. Linda smiled faintly as if I'd finally done what she wanted, disappeared on my own terms. Madison hugged me at the bus station, whispered, "Don't come back unless you have something to prove." I promised myself I would. Basic training broke my body before it built me. But for the first time, the rules made sense. No manipulation, no favoritism. Every mistake was measured, not magnified. I ran until my lungs burned, until the noise of home faded. Silence still lived inside me, but now it was discipline, not fear. When I earned my first commendation, I mailed a photo to my father. He never wrote back, but a month later, Linda sent a card. "Proud of you, dear. Madison just got accepted into college. You two are making us so proud." I read it twice, looking for warmth, found only distance. In the Army, I learned law. Military justice fascinated me because it believed that truth could be proven, that conduct could be measured without bias. I chose the JAG Corps because it felt like control. I told myself that if I could master the rules of justice, I could finally understand why silence had failed me as a child. But even inside uniformed order, there were ghosts. I met soldiers who stayed silent after things they shouldn't have endured. I saw women take blame to protect others. I saw men hide pain behind loyalty. Each case I handled chipped away at my certainty that rules alone could save anyone. Yet I still believed in duty. Belief was easier than doubt. I didn't see Linda and Madison again for years. The last memory I had of them was a Christmas card with a photo of the three of them, my father, Linda, and Madison, standing by a new house in Charleston. My name wasn't on the card. There was no, "We miss you." Just, "Happy Holidays from the Wards." I looked at it once, then filed it in my drawer under past. I thought distance would dilute their reach. I was wrong. Some betrayals age quietly, waiting for air. When the military police read me my rights years later in that glittering ballroom, I didn't think of rank or regulation. I thought of that first day in Beaufort, Linda's soft voice saying a soldier's daughter should know her place. I had obeyed that command for half a lifetime. I just didn't realize until that night that silence had always been the place she built for me. Years passed in a rhythm only soldiers understand. Dawn runs briefings, endless paperwork, the weight of responsibility disguised as routine. My uniform became a kind of truth I could trust. It fit the way silence once did: tight, exact, dependable. I learned how to stand when others shouted how to listen, when chaos filled a room. But every time I saluted a superior or walked into a courtroom to defend another soldier, a small voice inside me asked the same question: why hadn't I defended myself back then? I told myself the past was gone. It wasn't. It had only learned new manners. At Fort Liberty, the summers were long and humid. The pine trees whispered when the wind changed direction, as if gossiping about who stayed and who broke. My office overlooked the parade field. Sometimes between hearings, I'd watch the new recruits running in formation. Their voices rose together, a single sound of certainty. I envied that kind of unity. In the law, truth was lonelier. That was where I met Lieutenant Colonel Jonas Reed. He was nearing retirement, a man carved by patience and long service. He had a limp from an old accident he never explained, and a voice that could turn a briefing into a confession. "Captain Ward," he said on my first day, "you look like someone who believes in rules." I nodded. "Good. Just remember, rules are the bones, people are the blood." At the time, I didn't understand. I was still too proud of how clean my record was, too sure that justice was something you could hold steady if you just kept your emotions locked away. Reed didn't argue. He simply let life prove him right. Months later, I was assigned to assist on a case involving a young private accused of insubordination. He had refused an order from a superior who'd been harassing him for weeks. The evidence was thin, the command stacked against him. I told him to cooperate, to keep quiet, to let the process work. He looked at me with disbelief and said, "Ma'am, if I stay quiet, they'll win." His words landed like a mirror. I told him silence was dignity. But when he was convicted, when I saw his shoulders slump as they led him away, I felt something inside me fracture. The system had done what families do. It preferred comfort over truth. After the hearing, I found myself sitting on the back steps of the courthouse. Reed joined me without speaking. He offered a cup of coffee that smelled like burnt hope. "You did everything by the book," he said. "That's supposed to feel like a win." I nodded, but it didn't. "Sir, it feels like we just wrote silence into policy." He chuckled, the kind of dry laugh that hides grief. "Justice isn't loud, Ward," he said, "but sometimes it needs a microphone." That line stayed with me long after he left the service. It was a quiet rebuke, gentle but sharp, the kind that makes you look at your own reflection and realize you've mistaken obedience for honor. That night, I couldn't sleep. The barracks were silent, except for the hum of the air vents. I sat at my desk, staring at the framed photo of my graduating class. I thought of Madison's staged tears, Linda's perfect poise, my father's exhausted eyes. Every lie they told had survived because I refused to speak. I told myself it was restraint. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was loyalty twisted into submission. The line between them had blurred. I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence. "Silence feels safe until it starts to rot." In the months that followed, I began to speak more in court. Not loudly, but with precision. I learned that truth doesn't need to shout when it stands on evidence. My colleagues started to call me the quiet captain, half respect, half teasing. I didn't mind. Every word I spoke carried the weight of years I had spent mute. When younger officers came to me for advice, I told them what Reed had told me. Justice needs a voice. Use yours before someone else uses it for you. One afternoon, while reviewing case files, an envelope arrived on my desk. It had no return address, just my name typed neatly. Inside was a wedding invitation. Madison Harper Ward, it read in cursive. Gold cordially invites you to celebrate at the Charleston Officers Club. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Same venue, same chandelier, same city I had run from. Linda's handwriting signed the note at the bottom. It would mean a lot to your father if you came. For a long time, I didn't move. The air seemed to thicken around the paper. I could almost hear Linda's voice behind it, sweet, commanding, pretending kindness while setting the stage. I thought of Reed's lesson of the private who lost because I told him to be silent. I folded the invitation, once slid it into my drawer, and whispered to no one. Not this time. That decision was small, but it was the first act of defiance that didn't require noise. I didn't know then that this same hall would later become the place of my humiliation, the arena where my past and present would collide under the same chandelier light. I only knew that some storms return to finish what they started, and when they do, you either run again or you stand. By the time I turned 35, my life had narrowed into precision. The Army did that to you. It took everything blurred and drew straight lines through it. Fort Liberty was both a home and a proving ground built on the sound of marching boots and engines that never truly slept. Every morning I ran the perimeter before sunrise, the air thick with humidity and pine resin. The rhythm steadied me the same way prayer steadies the faithful. Out there, the world was honest. No step counted unless you earned it. Inside my office, stacks of case files waited. Each folder held a story that could ruin or redeem someone. I treated them like weapons that required control. Justice had no favorites, but it did demand attention. My colleagues called me Captain Steele. I didn't correct them. Strength was easier to wear than truth. The truth was that I still woke at night to the echo of my stepmother's voice telling me to know my place. Every commendation I earned was another way to prove she had been wrong about me. The first case that changed me came disguised as routine. A young private named Collins reported harassment from his superior, a decorated sergeant with 20 years in. There was no proof except bruises and fear. Collins stuttered when he spoke, his hands trembling as he tried to explain what happened. The sergeant sat across from me later, polished, polite, his tones soaked in confidence. "Captain, the boy's weak," he said. "He's making excuses." I watched him carefully the way predators watch to measure threat. His uniform was perfect, his words almost convincing. But the silence that followed his denial told a louder truth. I knew that silence. I had lived inside it. I built my case carefully, every detail measured. When I pushed for disciplinary action, my superior, Colonel Grant, called me into his office. He gestured to the report, his expression unreadable. "Captain Ward," he said, "sometimes keeping order means letting small things slide. Don't make this your crusade." I wanted to answer that justice wasn't a crusade, it was a duty. But I only said, with respect, "Sir, small things grow when ignored." His sigh was long, almost tired. "You have potential, Ward, but compassion without caution can end a career." That night, I stayed late reviewing policy. Rules were supposed to protect the innocent, but too often they cushioned the powerful. I thought of Private Collins walking out of my office, shoulders low, eyes dim. I couldn't let him be another casualty of quiet. I worked until dawn, drafting a legal recommendation so airtight it couldn't be dismissed without consequence. When the hearing came, I presented it with calm precision. My voice didn't shake. The sergeant was suspended pending investigation. Collins transferred to another unit. He saluted me before he left, gratitude flickering in eyes still wary. I didn't feel heroic. I felt human. After the hearing, I found an email in my inbox. No sender listed, just the subject line. "Heard about the sergeant. Good work, Ward." The message was signed Reed. I hadn't heard from Lieutenant Colonel Jonas Reed in years. He had retired to somewhere quiet in Virginia. His words brought a steadiness I hadn't realized I missed. Underneath his note was a single line: "Justice isn't loud. Keep the microphone close." I smiled just slightly. He always knew when to remind me who I was. As months passed, my reputation grew. Soldiers trusted me not because I won every case, but because I listened. I saw myself in each of them, the ones who hesitated, who didn't know how to speak without permission. Sometimes I walked past the memorial wall outside headquarters and read the engraved names. The wind there had a weight to it. Each name was a story that ended mid-sentence. I wondered how many of them had stayed silent when they should have shouted. One evening after work, the sunset over Fort Liberty was blood orange bleeding into the horizon. I stood by the training field watching recruits march in perfect formation. Their cadence echoed across the base, precise, unified, relentless. For a moment, I let myself imagine that sound was my own heartbeat, steady and control. But control can be an illusion. My phone buzzed. A message from the Public Affairs Office invited me to attend a regional recognition ceremony in Charleston, my hometown. The words felt like gravity. The event would honor local service members for outstanding duty. They wanted Captain Tessa Ward to represent Fort Liberty. I read the email twice, my throat tightening. The last time I'd stepped into that city, I'd been a daughter blamed a girl silenced. Now I'd return as a captain. On paper, it was triumph. In my chest, it felt like unfinished business stirring awake. I closed the email and stared at my reflection in the dark window. The uniform looked right, but the eyes staring back still carried something unsettled. I thought about Linda, about Madison, about the life I'd left behind. Maybe going back was inevitable. Some stories don't end. They circle back until you stand in the place that broke you. The question was whether I'd still stand the same way. The invitation sat on my desk for a week before I touched it again. Every morning I'd glance at it between case files, pretending it was just another memo waiting to be signed. But it wasn't. It was a door back to everything I'd built my life to escape. I told myself I could ignore it, that Fort Liberty was enough, that my duty here mattered more than family ghosts. But every night when the office emptied and the hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence, I'd catch myself staring at my own reflection in the window. The face looking back was composed, disciplined, decorated, and still afraid of one woman's smile. Fear, I had learned, doesn't vanish with rank. It just learns to salute. By the end of that week, orders came from headquarters approving my attendance at the Charleston ceremony. I hadn't requested it. Colonel Grant had. "You deserve recognition, Captain," he said when I asked why. "People like you remind the public what integrity looks like." His words sounded like praise, but they felt like command. I smiled, said thank you, and tried not to imagine Linda's satisfied grin when she saw me walking back into her world in uniform. The flight to Charleston was short but heavy. The air smelled of jet fuel and salt, the same mix that once defined my childhood. When I landed, a local reporter recognized me from a recent article about the Collins case. "Captain Ward," she said, thrusting out her hand. "You're the quiet hero from Fort Liberty, right?" I almost laughed. Quiet hero. If only she knew the kind of silence that built me. I checked into the hotel near the harbor, the same one that used to host military fundraisers my father attended. From my window, I could see the church steeples piercing the skyline, the cobblestone streets below, glowing under streetlights. The city looked unchanged, but I had changed too much to believe it hadn't shifted with me. That night, I ironed my uniform until it was flawless. Habit, not vanity. The mirror reflected order, but I knew chaos could hide anywhere, even behind polish. The next morning, I visited the Veterans Memorial downtown before the ceremony. The marble names caught the morning light, rows of sacrifice etched into permanence. I traced one with my gloved hand, Major Robert Ward. My father. His death 2 years earlier had been quiet, a stroke while reading in his study. Linda had sent me a one-line email afterward. He went peacefully. No invitation to the funeral. No condolences. Just that. I stood there longer than I meant to until the reflection of the flag in the marble looked like it was bleeding red into my palm. "You should have stopped her," I whispered, not sure if I meant him or myself. The wind off the harbor didn't answer. That evening, the Charleston Officers Club shimmered like a memory that refused to fade. The chandeliers, the polished floor, the smell of wine and polished silver, all exactly as I remembered. Only now I was part of the display. As I entered, heads turned, whispers trailed behind me. "That's Captain Ward. Jag, course right. She's the one who took down that sergeant." Compliments disguised as curiosity, the music swelled violins painting civility over everything raw. Linda appeared before I reached my seat. She hadn't aged much. Her hair was perfect. Her dress, dark green silk. "Tessa," she said, as if the word tasted sour. "You look composed." The pause before the compliment was deliberate. I smiled. "Discipline helps." Her laugh was thin. "It's so good to see you home. Your father would have been proud." I let that pass. "Where's Madison?" I asked. "Busy preparing for her speech. She's being honored too, you know. Civilian service recognition. She's done wonderful charity work for veterans." I nodded once. "Of course she has." Linda's smile deepened. "You two can stand together tonight. It'll look so good for the family." There it was again, that word family, the same word she used to mask every humiliation. I wanted to walk out to board the next plane back to Fort Liberty, but duty was muscle memory. I stayed. When Madison appeared later, radiant and rehearsed, she greeted me with the kind of hug that ends before it begins. "Captain Ward," she said too loudly, her tone playful for the cameras nearby. "Finally home to make us proud." I caught the gleam of satisfaction in her eyes and knew something beneath the surface waited to snap. During the ceremony, I sat through speeches about honor and unity, words that once meant safety. But beneath the applause, something colder stirred. I could feel Linda's gaze on me from across the room, measuring, anticipating. The evening was perfect on paper medals, smiles, family photos, but the air carried tension sharp enough to cut. As the night closed and my name was announced among honorees, I stepped toward the podium, unaware that the next time I'd stand there, the words "Arrest that woman" would shatter every illusion left standing. The morning after the ceremony, Charleston smelled the way I remembered sweetgrass salt and rain about to fall. I should have left right after the applause ended, boarded the first flight back to Fort Liberty, but guilt has a strange way of disguising itself as duty. When my mother called and said Linda wanted to host a family dinner, her voice trembled with that fragile hope only good women keep too long. "It's just supper, Tessa," she said. "For once, let's not turn everything into a battlefield." So I agreed, though I knew the field was already mined. The old Ward house stood at the end of a quiet street shaded by magnolias, the same one where I used to count the cracks in the ceiling while Linda whispered through the walls. The porch light glowed like an eye that never blinked. I parked outside uniform pressed sidearm locked away in the glove compartment and sat for a moment listening to cicadas winding their metallic song through the dark. Soldiers are trained to sense when something is wrong long before it happens. That night, every instinct I owned told me to leave. But family teaches disobedience too. Linda opened the door before I knocked. She wore pearls and perfume thick enough to choke the air. "Tessa," she said warmly, "you're early." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The dining room shimmered under candlelight, the table set with china we never used when my mother was alive. Madison appeared from the kitchen carrying a bowl of salad like she'd never broken a dish in her life. "Look who decided to grace us," she said. Her tone had the precision of a scalpel. My father sat at the head of the table, thinner, now his hair gone to silver. "Let's eat before it gets cold," he muttered. His voice still carried that military crispness, though softer dulled by compromise. We bowed our heads as he said grace. His words stumbled halfway through, the kind of hesitation that comes when a man prays for peace in a house that never held any. Dinner began quietly enough. Silverware small talk, the practiced choreography of pretending. Linda poured the wine. "To family," she said, "even when we don't see eye to eye." I raised my glass because that's what soldiers do when surrounded by enemies, they blend in. Madison's laughter rang too loud. "So, Captain," she said, "how does it feel to boss people around for a living?" I smiled. "It feels like responsibility." "Responsibility?" she repeated, twisting the word as if it tasted bitter. "Is that what you call it when you get people court-martialed?" Linda's hand brushed her daughter's arm gently, as if to say, "Not yet." I focused on the clock above the mantel. Each tick was a countdown. My father cleared his throat. Enough, Madison, he said. We're not doing this tonight. She pouted but obeyed for the moment. I excused myself to the kitchen for water. The air in there was cooler, quieter, until I heard them whispering behind me, Linda's voice low and sharp. She needs to be reminded she's not untouchable. Madison answered almost laughing. Don't worry, I've got it handled. When I returned, the tension had disguised itself again as civility. Madison filled my glass eyes glinting. Sorry, sis, she said sweetly. You know I joke too much. I nodded, though my pulse betrayed me. Halfway through dessert, Madison reached for the wine bottle, tipped it too far, and a deep red stain spread across my uniform sleeve like a wound. Oh my God, I'm so sorry, she said, voice high with fake concern. Linda grabbed a napkin and began dabbing at the fabric, her touch too forceful, almost angry. It'll come out, she murmured, if you act quickly. The room felt smaller, hotter. My father stood muttering about needing air and stepped onto the porch. I followed a minute later. He leaned against the railing, cigarette glowing faintly between his fingers. She's baiting you, he said quietly. Let it go, Tessa. Not tonight. His eyes didn't meet mine. You always say that, I replied, and it never stops them. He didn't answer. Maybe he didn't have one. When I went back inside, the house smelled of smoke and spilled wine. Madison was filming something on her phone, claiming she was documenting the family night. Linda's smile returned. You should join in, Tessa, she said. Show everyone you can relax. I stood still. Put it away, I told Madison. We don't film each other. She shrugged. You film criminals every day. Consider it justice practice. The tone was light, but the intent was a knife. I turned to leave. That's when Linda's voice followed me silk over venom. You think that uniform makes you better. It just makes your mistakes louder. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. I walked to my car, heart-pounding, uniform-stained jaw tight. Through the window, I could see them laughing, toasting something invisible. I started the engine but didn't drive off right away. In the reflection of the rearview mirror, my own eyes looked back calm, unreadable. I thought silence meant survival. I didn't know it was the opening act of betrayal. 2 days later, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. The sun hadn't risen yet. The hotel room was washed in the gray light of dawn. The number flashing on the screen wasn't familiar, but the tone in the voice on the other end was the clipped precision of official business. Captain Ward, the caller said, "This is Major Kellen from Military Internal Affairs. We need you to report to Fort Liberty within 24 hours regarding a matter of conduct. You'll receive formal documentation by noon." He paused, as if waiting for an explanation I didn't owe him. "Understood," I said, because that's what soldiers say when the world stops making sense. The call ended. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing. The sheets were tangled, my uniform draped neatly over a chair like a promise I'd broken. A matter of conduct. The phrase repeated itself in my head until it lost meaning. I reached for the coffee pot and found my hand shaking. When I looked up, my reflection in the dark window looked like someone I no longer recognized, composed but hollowed out. By noon, the email arrived. The charge alleged assault on a civilian during an off-duty event. Attached was a video file. I didn't open it immediately. Some instinct told me that whatever waited inside would rearrange the ground beneath my feet. When I finally pressed play, the screen filled with chaos, blurred motion, a woman shouting the sound of a chair scraping. Then me, or rather, the shape of me, standing too close to Madison, voice raised, hands gesturing. The clip cut sharply spliced, then resumed with Madison on the floor, crying her mother, screaming for someone to stop me. My heart clenched. It wasn't me. Not the way it looked. The timing was wrong, the angles distorted. I had been outside when that sound, the chair, the scream, had echoed through the porch screen. But the camera didn't care about truth. It cared about spectacle. My first impulse was to call Linda to demand an explanation, but reason held me back. That's what they wanted, emotion, evidence of instability, anything that could stain the uniform deeper than the wine already had. Instead, I called Colonel Grant. His assistant patched me through. "Captain Ward," he said after a pause, too long to be polite. "You're aware of the situation?" "Yes, sir," I replied. "Then you understand that Internal Affairs will conduct their own inquiry." Until then, I recommend full cooperation." His voice carried the weight of distance, the tone of someone already shifting you from colleague to liability. That evening, I sat at my desk surrounded by case files that no longer mattered. Every page I'd ever signed, every report I'd written seemed to dissolve under the heat of accusation. I tried to eat but couldn't taste the food, tried to sleep but couldn't trust the quiet. The world had tilted. I kept replaying the clip in my mind, frame by frame, searching for the flaw that would set me free. It wasn't just the betrayal that burned, it was the precision of it. Someone had studied me long enough to know how I moved, how I sounded, how to twist those details into guilt. By midnight, I drove back to the base. The guard at the gate recognized me, but didn't salute. He hesitated, scanning my ID longer than necessary. "Rough week, ma'am?" he asked softly. I managed a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Something like that. Inside the barracks, the halls smelled of polish and exhaustion. I passed a few officers who pretended not to stare. Word travels fast in the military. Scandal travels faster. In my office, I found an envelope waiting. The official letter of summons signed and sealed. At the bottom, a line in cold black ink. "Failure to comply will result in suspension pending investigation." I folded it once neatly and placed it in my pocket. Paper doesn't weigh much until it carries your name. When dawn came, I stood outside the hangar watching the flag climb the mast. The air was sharp, clean, indifferent. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like saluting. I thought about Madison's laugh at that dinner table, the way Linda's hand had brushed the napkin over my sleeve, deliberate, almost ceremonial. It wasn't rage that filled me. Then it was clarity. They had taken my silence for surrender. They had mistaken discipline for weakness. And that was their miscalculation. I walked back inside, boots echoing against concrete, each step measured steady. My arm still ached where Madison had twisted it, but the pain was almost welcome. It reminded me I was still whole, still dangerous in ways they hadn't accounted for. I began to gather files, phone logs, messages, anything that would trace the falsehood back to its source. Justice, I reminded myself, isn't loud, but sometimes it needs a microphone. By the time I left for Fort Liberty that night, the fear had burned away, leaving something sharper. I looked once more at my reflection in the rearview mirror and saw no trace of the girl who stayed quiet for peace. The woman staring back was done with silence. The night of the ceremony began like every other performance of civility. The Charleston Officers Club gleamed under chandeliers that had seen generations of medals pinned and reputations polished. The air was crisp with perfume starch and expectation. My name was printed on the program halfway down the list, sandwiched between two men whose careers had not yet collided with shame. I told myself it was just another event, another night to smile, shake hands, and remind the room that service could still look like grace. I arrived early in uniform, my arm stiff under the healing bandage. The hall was crowded, officers in dress blues, civilians in sequined gowns, the hum of small talk carefully balanced on wine glasses. A quartet played something delicate that didn't belong to reality. At the head table, I spotted Linda before she saw me. Her hair was perfect, her laughter rehearsed. Madison sat beside her, radiant in a crimson dress that would photograph well. When the host stepped to the microphone and announced the evening's honorees, the room shifted its collective gaze toward the stage. My name followed applause for a colonel who'd just retired. "Captain Tessa Ward," he said. "United States Army Judge, Advocate General's Corps, recognized for exceptional service and ethical leadership." The words carried through the speakers like a sermon meant for someone else. I rose. The fabric of my sleeve brushed the table, catching for a second on the edge of the program. My father, seated 2 tables away, gave the smallest nod, his face unreadable. I climbed the steps to the stage, the sound of my heels deliberate against the marble. The host handed me the medal's velvet case. I hadn't even opened it when a voice cut through the music. "Arrest that woman!" It wasn't shouted so much as hurled. The room froze. For a moment, even the air forgot what to do. The quartet stopped mid-bow, a violin string still vibrating in protest. 2 military police officers appeared from the side aisle, their boots clicking like punctuation. I felt the eyes of everyone I'd ever met converge into one collective stare. "What is this?" the host stammered, turning pale. The taller officer spoke flatly. "Captain Ward, you're under investigation for assault on a civilian and misuse of authority. You'll come with us." Whispers broke like wind through dry grass. My father half rose from his chair but stopped when Linda touched his arm. She was smiling. Not wide, not gloating, just enough to let me know she had chosen this moment with care. Madison gasped theatrically. "Oh my God, that's her," she said to no one and everyone. The officers stepped closer. "Ma'am," one said softly, "please place your hands where I can see them." I did, calmly. I heard my own voice, distant and steady. "This is a mistake." Behind them, Madison stood the hem of her red dress brushing the floor as she moved toward me. "She's dangerous," she said. Her tone was trembling perfection. "You don't know what she's capable of." When she reached me, she stumbled or pretended to and grabbed my sleeve. The seam ripped. Buttons scattered like gunmetal on the stage. Her hand shot out again, this time gripping my wrist hard. Pain shot up my arm. I heard a pop before I felt it. The familiar sound of something tearing inside the body. My knees hit the floor. Gasps echoed. "She attacked me!" Madison cried. Linda rose slowly, lifting a hand toward the officers as though directing traffic. "You see," she said, voice clear and satisfied. "You see how she is." The officers pulled me upright. My arm hung useless, the sharp heat of injury spreading under the fabric. Cameras flashed. Someone in the back whispered, "That's Captain Ward, the one from Fort Liberty." The host fumbled with his notes, unsure whether to intervene or vanish. I caught my father's face in the crowd, pale, unmoving. He didn't speak. Not a word. The officer tightened his grip on my uninjured arm. "Ma'am, we have to go." I straightened, blood roaring in my ears, pain radiating down to my fingers. Around us, the room buzzed with nervous sympathy and hidden delight. The metal box lay open on the stage, the ribbon gleaming under the lights. I didn't look down. I kept my chin level, my breathing measured. This was not defeat. It was exposure. And though the cuffs closed cold around my wrists, my silence was louder than the crowd's disbelief. They led me down from the stage slowly, as if afraid I might explode. The crowd parted, unsure whether to watch or look away. That's the thing about spectacle, it demands witnesses, even from the kind who pretend they disapprove. My boots struck the marble with every step, echoing through a silence that no orchestra could fill. Someone whispered my name the way you whisper a prayer for someone already lost. The pain in my arm pulsed with my heartbeat, sharp, steady, alive. The officer on my left kept his hand light, almost respectful. The other avoided my eyes. I didn't blame them. Orders are just masks for fear. I had worn that same mask once. Now, stripped of rank in everything but name, I realized I'd been trained my whole life for this moment. The humiliation no one could steal from me because I refused to hand it over. We stopped near the edge of the stage where the photographers had gathered like vultures dressed for dinner. The flash from their cameras washed the room in artificial lightning. I blinked once, twice, and found Madison's face in the crowd. She stood beside her mother, a tissue pressed delicately to her cheek, pretending to hold back tears. Linda's arm was around her, protective, triumphant. They were perfect, an image of grace built on ruin. My ruin. The host tried to resume the program, his voice trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could just—" He didn't finish. No one was listening. Every sound, every breath, every heartbeat belonged to the theater of my disgrace. And yet, standing there, something shifted. The fear drained first, then the anger, until all that remained was a strange, crystalline calm. I looked at the room, at the donors clutching pearls, at the retired officers stiff with discomfort, at the young cadets recording from the back rows because history now fit inside a phone. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. My silence was a statement, my stillness a form of defiance. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered, "This can't be right." And for the first time that night, I sensed doubt moving through the crowd like a spark searching for kindling. They escorted me toward the side exit. The air felt heavy, thick with perfume and panic. A few people I recognized avoided my gaze entirely, men I'd served with women I'd mentored. Their silence hurt more than the pain in my arm. Betrayal is quieter in public. It hides behind lowered eyes. Halfway down the aisle, a young lieutenant I barely knew stepped aside to let us pass. His hand hovered at his side, not in salute, but in something smaller, an aborted gesture of respect. That was enough. In that brief hesitation, I understood something vital. Shame is a choice, and I wasn't choosing it. When we reached the double doors, I turned my head slightly, just enough to catch the reflection of my father. He hadn't moved from his chair. His hands were clasped together, knuckles, white jaw, tight. For a second, I thought he might stand, might speak. But he didn't. He stared at the table the way a man stares at a folded flag he isn't ready to receive. The officers paused to let a server move a tray from our path. The clink of glass against silver was the only sound. I inhaled once deeply and let the breath fill the hollow space inside me. The chandelier light spilled across the floor, glinting off my medals. I felt strangely weightless, detached from the scene, but fully awake inside it. It struck me then, the world can take everything from you, your name, your rank, your freedom. But it can't dictate your posture. So I stood straight, shoulders back, chin level. And in that stillness, the power returned, quiet but undeniable. Would you still stand tall if everyone believed the lie? The thought came uninvited, a whisper inside the roar of silence. I didn't need to say it aloud. The room already knew the answer. The younger officer glanced at me, uncertain. "Ma'am," he said softly, "this way, please." We stepped into the corridor. Behind us, the doors closed, muting the noise into something distant, almost gentle. Ahead, the hallway stretched long and bright-lined with framed photographs of heroes who'd never had to prove their innocence. My footsteps joined theirs, part of a history I hadn't chosen but now understood. As the cameras continued flashing behind the walls, I realized the difference between disgrace and transformation is perspective. Tonight, they saw a woman in handcuffs. Soon they'd see what that woman could do when silence became her weapon. The corridor outside the ballroom was lined with mirrors, each one catching fragments of my reflection as the officers walked me through. In one pane, I looked like a prisoner; in the next, a soldier returning from a different kind of war. The music inside had stopped. What replaced it was the hush of a crowd that had forgotten how to breathe. Every step I took echoed like judgment. The marble floor magnified sound until it became its own kind of anthem, the measured rhythm of restraint. The first camera flash came from behind us, then another. Reporters had already spilled into the hall, summoned by gossip faster than any radio signal. "Captain Ward, is it true you assaulted a civilian?" one called. Was it premeditated? Another shouted. I didn't answer. I kept walking. My silence gave them more than any statement could, a story to fill with whatever poison they preferred. One of the officers tried to shield me with his body as the flashes multiplied, but the light found me anyway, bleaching everything to stark white. I could smell the heat of the bulbs, the static of electricity in the air. Behind the clicking shutters and the swarm of questions, I caught sight of movement at the far end of the hall. 3 men in gray suits stood shoulder to shoulder, their posture unmistakable, steady, alert, assessing. SEALs. I knew the cadence of their stillness before I could see their faces. The way they distributed weight, the way their hands rested, never loose, never tense, ready for anything. I had worked beside them once in quieter operations where truth traveled slower than orders. They didn't move now, not yet, but their presence changed the air. The officers escorting me noticed too. Their grips shifted, tightening without thought. Authority recognizes its reflection even when it can't name it. As we passed a row of framed photographs, portraits of decorated service members, I saw my own picture among them, taken 2 years earlier, before the first gray appeared in my hair, before betrayal carved lines at the corners of my mouth. I almost laughed at the irony. I wondered how long it would stay there once the gossip reached headquarters. The officer on my left murmured, "Almost done, ma'am." His voice carried something like pity, something like respect. I nodded once. "I know." The crowd from the ballroom had begun to spill into the corridor now. I heard their shoes, the scrape of chairs, the collective murmur of witnesses seeking a moral angle. Linda's voice rose above the noise, perfectly pitched for sympathy. "It's such a tragedy," she said to a reporter, "but we have to trust the system." Madison clung to her arm, eyes red but dry. The cameras loved them. I kept my gaze forward. At the end of the hall, the three men in gray began to move, not quickly, but with purpose. The sound of their boots was distinct, measured, rhythmic, controlled. That cadence had followed me through sandstorms and briefing rooms, through missions that never made the papers. Now it followed me here to the edge of disgrace. The officers guiding me slowed uncertain. The tallest SEAL met my eyes for half a second and gave the smallest nod almost imperceptible. It was not a promise of rescue, it was acknowledgement. They knew what I knew, that justice moves like tidewater, slow and unstoppable. We reached the main doors. The night outside was waiting cool and merciless. Beyond the glass, I could see the reflection of blue and red lights pulsing from the street sirens, muted but present. The world was already watching. I paused at the threshold, lifted my chin, and squared my shoulders. My arm throbbed under the bandage, my wrists ached from the cuffs, but I stood straight. No words, no tears. Only the sound of my breath syncing with the rhythm of those distant boots, a reminder that silence can march too. Whatever waited beyond the door courtroom headlines' judgment, it would find me exactly like this unbroken. Fort Bragg's courtroom looked nothing like the ones on television. There was no mahogany drama, no sweeping music, just hard fluorescent light-polished floors and the quiet hum of discipline. The flag stood behind the bench, its edges still, its colors too vivid against the sterile white walls. I had stood beneath that flag before, but never on this side of the aisle. The air smelled faintly of paper and coffee gone cold, the scent of bureaucracy sharpening every breath. I sat at the defense table, hands folded, uniform pressed, despite the bandage beneath my sleeve. Across from me, Linda and Madison sat with their lawyer, a polished civilian in an expensive gray suit. Madison wore a sling on her arm, the performance detail that made the lie complete. Linda dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, whispering to her attorney, as though grief had made her fragile. I'd seen that act before polish over poison. The judge entered. We rose. The bailiff's voice was clear and practiced. "All rise for Colonel Judge Hollis." I remembered her name before my mind placed her face. She had served with my father 20 years earlier, back when military justice was half courtroom, half battlefield. Her gaze swept the room, pausing on me for an instant longer than the others. There was no warmth, just recognition. "Be seated," she said. The gavel struck once the sound small but absolute. The prosecutor began the opening statement, measured and meticulous. "This case concerns Captain Tessa Ward, accused of assaulting a civilian, Madison Ward, during a social event in Charleston, South Carolina." His voice carried the rhythm of someone who'd practiced the performance. "The evidence will show that Captain Ward used excessive force, causing injury, and that her behavior captured on video was unbecoming of an officer." He gestured toward the screen behind him. "The footage speaks for itself." The lights dimmed, the projector whirred to life, spilling falsehood across the wall. The video played exactly as I remembered it, grainy, chaotic cut at perfect angles to distort truth. It showed me stepping forward, arm raised, but not the glass that slipped from Madison's hand. Not the shove she'd given first, not the stain that started it all. The sound was manipulated too, my voice spliced from another recording, twisted into something harsh. In that instant, I understood how powerfully a lie could move when given a stage. Across the aisle, Madison sniffed theatrically. Her lawyer placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Linda turned her face away as though the pain were too much to bear. It was flawless choreography, victim witness, and mother united against the monster in uniform. When the video ended, the room felt smaller. The judge glanced at me. "Captain Ward, you'll have an opportunity to respond after cross-examination." "Yes, ma'am." My voice was steady. That steadiness seemed to unsettle more people than a protest would have. The prosecution called its witnesses. First came the event host, nervous and sweating. He recounted fragments of what he'd seen, mostly confusion, some shouting a figure in uniform moving forward. His words wavered, shaped by uncertainty. Then came a young officer who'd helped escort me from the room. His testimony was simple. He'd followed orders, nothing more. The prosecutor thanked him anyway. When it was time for the defense, my attorney, a quiet, meticulous JAG officer named Keller, rose. Captain Ward has served 14 years with distinction, he said. Her record reflects integrity under pressure, not violence. The prosecution's evidence, however dramatic, will not withstand technical scrutiny. He paused just long enough to let the words settle. The defense calls Sergeant Evelyn Brooks. I felt a jolt of surprise at the name. Evelyn had served with me at Fort Liberty Cyber Forensics Calm Under Fire, the kind of soldier who spoke only when truth demanded volume. She entered the courtroom in uniform posture, straight eyes clear. Sergeant Brooks Keller began. You've had an opportunity to examine the video evidence submitted by the prosecution. Yes, sir. And what did you find? She gestured toward the screen. This file has been edited. The metadata shows at least 3 splices, 2 audio overlays, and a compression timestamp inconsistent with the time of recording. In layman's terms, it's been doctored. A murmur rippled through the gallery. The prosecutor objected, but the judge raised a hand. Overruled. Continue. Evelyn pointed to the freeze frame on the screen. See the clock behind Captain Ward? The numbers read 21:14. In the next cut, they jump to 21:21. 7 minutes missing. The lighting shifts too, exposure levels don't match. Someone altered this footage after the fact. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was charged electric. Madison shifted in her seat. Linda's lips tightened. The prosecutor leaned toward his laptop, whispering to his assistant. Keller's voice stayed calm. Can you determine when this alteration occurred? Yes, sir. The edits were made on a civilian device 2 days before the file was turned in to Military Internal Affairs. The login trace belongs to an account registered under Madison Ward. The room erupted in noise, shuffling gasps, the metallic scrape of a chair. Madison turned pale eyes darting toward her mother. That's not true, she said, standing up too quickly. Her voice cracked. You don't know what you're talking about! Judge Hollis's gavel struck twice. Order. The word rang like steel. Madison sat down hard, her composure collapsing around her like glass. Linda leaned close, whispering fiercely, but the whisper carried. Stop talking. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just breathed the first full breath I'd taken since Charleston. For the first time, the burden of proof shifted away from me toward them. Evelyn continued unflinching. I can provide a full forensic breakdown. Every false frame, every alteration. The evidence speaks clearly. Captain Ward did not commit the assault. When she stepped down, the air in the courtroom changed. It was subtle but real, the kind of shift that happens when truth starts to find its footing. The judge looked at me again, eyes sharper now. Captain Ward will reconvene tomorrow for final statements. Yes, ma'am, I said. As we adjourned, I caught Evelyn's eye across the room. She gave a small nod, acknowledgement, not triumph. Justice, I realized, rarely arrives with fanfare. It comes quietly like dawn breaking through blinds. And this dawn had finally begun. The next morning, the courtroom felt colder. Maybe it was the air conditioning. Maybe it was the way truth chills a room before it sets it free. The seats were fuller now, reporters, officers, civilians drawn by curiosity and the scent of scandal beginning to rot. I sat at the defense table, hands still, expression unreadable. I had learned long ago that calm disarms faster than fury. Judge Hollis entered precisely at 0900. Her robe flowed like a shadow under the fluorescent lights, and the silver streak in her hair caught the edge of the flag's reflection. This court will come to order, she said. The gavel struck once, sharp enough to silence everything else. The prosecutor opened first, his voice less certain than yesterday. He recited procedures, protocol precedent, everything except conviction. Regardless of alleged tampering, he said the defendant's conduct remains questionable. His argument drifted thin and desperate. The judge's brow tightened. Major, she said evenly. Questionable is not a charge. Present your facts or yield the floor. He cleared his throat, shuffled papers, and finally sat. My attorney rose only briefly. The defense rests, he said. The evidence stands for itself. That's when the judge turned toward Linda and Madison. Mrs. Ward, Miss Ward, she said you've both provided testimony central to this case. Before I proceed with the ruling, I'm granting you an opportunity to clarify or amend any prior statements. Her tone was calm, but edged with something colder, an invitation lined with warning. Linda straightened her blazer lips, pressed into the soft smile of someone who'd never been told no. Your Honor, she began smoothly, my daughter and I only wanted to cooperate. This has been traumatic for us. We simply— Traumatic, the judge repeated, cutting her off. Indeed. She turned her gaze toward Madison. Miss Ward. Madison hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly on the table, fingers tapping a rhythm of guilt. It was all so fast, she said, voice cracking. Tessa, she lost her temper. I just tried to calm her down. The judge leaned forward. You are aware, Miss Ward, that tampering with evidence in a military investigation is a federal offense? Madison's eyes widened. I only trimmed the clip just to— She stopped. The room inhaled as one. Linda's head snapped toward her daughter. Madison, she hissed low, but not low enough. Stop talking. But the words were already out unraveling in the still air. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, his case dissolving in real time. Madison's voice grew higher, unsteady. She's always been the favorite, she blurted. Dad, everyone, even you people, she gets away with everything. I just wanted someone to see her for who she is. Enough, Linda snapped, but it was too late. Judge Hollis's gavel struck once, then twice. Order! The word echoed like thunder. Miss Ward, you have just admitted to altering evidence submitted to this court. Mrs. Ward, were you aware of your daughter's actions? Linda's composure cracked at the edges. Of course not, This is a misunderstanding. She acted on her own. The judge didn't let her finish. I served with Major Robert Ward, she said, voice low and deliberate. He was a man of quiet integrity. I find it difficult to believe he would have condoned this. The mention of my father's name hit the room like a ghost returning. Linda's face drained of color. You knew Robert? She whispered. I did, Judge Hollis said, and I know his daughter's record as well. 14 years of service, not a single blemish, decorated for conduct under pressure. Tell me, Mrs. Ward, what does she gain from hurting you? No one answered. The silence swelled heavier than accusation. Finally, the judge turned to the bailiff. Retrieve Sergeant Brooks's full report. The folder landed on the bench moments later. She read in silence, each page turned with surgical precision. Then she spoke. The evidence confirms fabrication splicing and unauthorized file transfer from Madison Ward's personal device. Additionally, physical evidence supports the defendant's claim of defensive injury. Her eyes found me again. Captain Ward, please stand. I rose slowly, uniform crisp, arms stiff but steady. This court finds the defendant not guilty on all counts, she said. Effective immediately, Captain Ward is cleared of all allegations and restored to full duty. A murmur rippled through the courtroom, shock relief. Something close to applause quickly stifled by protocol. Judge Hollis wasn't done. Furthermore, she continued, voice rising. Just enough, this court orders an immediate investigation into the actions of Madison Ward and Linda Ward for filing a false report, evidence tampering, and assault on a U.S. Army officer. Madison gasped. You can't do that? The judge's eyes narrowed. I just did. The gavel came down once more, sealing the sound into permanence. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I could feel the collapse behind me, the whispered panic, the scrape of chairs, the futile protest of people who thought appearances could outrun consequence. Judge Hollis gathered her papers, then paused, her gaze returning to me. Captain Ward, she said softly, your father once told me that honor doesn't raise its voice, it simply endures. Today I heard it. I held her eyes, throat tight, but no words came. I didn't salute. I just nodded. It was enough. The courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters whispered into phones. The prosecutor packed his briefcase without looking up. Evelyn Brooks stood near the exit waiting. As I passed her, she said quietly, Told you truth makes better evidence. Outside, the afternoon light was blinding. The flag over the courthouse stirred in the wind, its shadow cutting across the steps where I stopped to breathe. My reflection in the glass doors showed a woman I recognized again. Scarred, yes, but intact. Behind me, I could hear Linda's voice cracking into pleas, Madison sobbing, cameras snapping, but all of it sounded far away like thunder after a storm that's already passed. For the first time in months, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I was simply standing still. The quiet felt enormous, and in that stillness, I understood survival isn't the absence of noise, it's the decision to remain standing after it ends. 3 months later, Charleston felt like another lifetime. The air was cooler, the magnolias just beginning to shed their last flowers. I drove past the same streets that once felt like a maze of memories, and for the first time, they didn't close in on me. The whispers had faded. The trial was over. Justice had spoken, and so had silence. The Charleston Memorial Hall rose ahead, white columns gleaming under the morning sun. Today was the annual ceremony honoring fallen service members, and this time my invitation wasn't a summons. It was a choice. The brass band was already warming up when I arrived at the distant thrum of drums carrying through the open square. People stood in neat rows outside, hands over hearts medals catching sunlight. As I stepped out of the car, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Some faces recognized me. Others simply stared, trying to remember where they'd seen me before. The uniform I wore wasn't the one torn from me that night. It was new, crisp, the color of forgiveness hard-earned. My left hand still bore the faint scar where my arm had broken. I didn't hide it. I let the light touch it. Inside, the hall smelled of cedar and old paper programs. Portraits of local veterans lined the walls. I found my father's photo among them, a younger, Robert Ward, eyes bright, uniform, immaculate. Beneath the frame, a brass plate read, "Service is not what you say, it's what you stand for." For years, I thought those words were his. Now I understood he'd borrowed them from life itself. The master of ceremonies approached, clipboard in hand. "Captain Ward," he said with careful respect, "we'd be honored if you'd deliver the closing remarks." I nodded once. "Yes, sir." As the event began, I sat in the front row, the hum of conversation soft behind me. Rows of flags framed the stage, and behind them, sunlight filtered through tall windows, painting the floor in gold. Families clutched folded flags, their faces a mix of grief and pride. I remembered being one of them once when my father's service ended in silence and unanswered questions. When they called my name, I rose. The hall quieted, the kind of quiet that carries weight. My heels clicked against the wood floor as I crossed to the podium. The microphone hummed faintly. I looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some cautious, some already believing again. I took a breath. "There are two kinds of silence," I began. "The kind that hides fear and the kind that holds peace." A ripple moved through the audience. I saw heads tilt, shoulders relax. For a long time, I continued. I thought silence meant strength, that staying quiet kept families together, kept peace in uniform, kept the world steady. But silence, if you choose it for the wrong reasons, doesn't keep peace. It protects lies. The words hung there sharp and soft all at once. I've served long enough to know the world doesn't always reward truth. I said, my voice steady. Sometimes it mocks it. Sometimes it cuffs it and drags it off a stage. But the truth has its own endurance. It doesn't shout. It waits. And when the time is right, it stands. From the third row, I caught sight of my father. He was thinner now, older, but his eyes, those same eyes from my childhood, were fixed on me. He stood slowly, a motion that drew others with him. For a second, it wasn't applause, it wasn't ceremony, it was a reckoning made visible. When he reached the stage, he didn't speak. He simply took my hand. His palm was warm, his grip sure, the same way he used to steady me before a salute. "I'm proud of you, Captain," he whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. "Your mother would have been too." I swallowed hard, the words catching somewhere between grief and grace. Around us, the hall rose to its feet, not in ovation, but in acknowledgement. The band didn't play. No one wanted to drown out the silence. At the back of the room, I saw them, Linda and Madison, sitting apart from the crowd. No pearls this time. No cameras. Linda's shoulders were rigid, her expression a portrait of restraint. Madison's eyes were red. Her hands clasped tight in her lap. They didn't meet my gaze. They didn't have to. The distance between us was the verdict made flesh. I looked away, not out of mercy, but out of peace. There was nothing left to prove. As I ended my speech, I said only this: for those who serve, for those who fall, and for those who stand even when standing hurts, thank you. Applause followed, but it felt secondary, almost unnecessary. What mattered was the stillness afterward, the quiet that filled every corner of that hall. A silence that wasn't empty anymore. It was earned. When the ceremony ended, I stepped outside into the Charleston afternoon. The flag above the memorial fluttered against a sky so clear it almost hurt to look at. My father joined me on the steps, his arm around my shoulder, the warmth of forgiveness radiating through his touch. Below us, people lingered, shaking hands, telling stories, laughing softly. The world, for once, didn't feel like a battlefield, and as the band began to play the final hymn, I realized I no longer needed to explain who I was or what I'd endured. The truth had already spoken quietly but unmistakably. The weeks that followed passed without spectacle. No headlines screamed for justice, no breaking news demanded retribution. The storm had spent itself, and all that remained was the quiet work of consequence. Justice, I had learned, does not need a parade. It only needs time. The first ripple came through official channels. A notice circulated through the Charleston Military Families Association, the same organization Linda had chaired for years. The email was short, clinical. Due to confirmed ethics violations, Mrs. Linda Ward has been removed from her position as head of the Community Outreach Committee effective immediately. The tone was professional, but between the lines I could hear the sound of her empire cracking. I didn't gloat. I didn't share it with anyone. I simply read it once, folded the paper copy the base clerk had handed me, and placed it in my desk drawer beside my father's old compass. Some victories don't belong to pride. They belong to closure. A week later, another message reached me, this one from the scholarship board at the Citadel. Madison's scholarship had been rescinded after a formal review of her conduct during the investigation. The notice cited character misconduct inconsistent with leadership standards. The words were clinical too, but the weight behind them was moral, not bureaucratic. She would have to reapply under probation if she ever wanted to return. I imagined her reading that letter, her perfect posture collapsing, the smile faltering, and I felt something I didn't expect, not satisfaction but release, because revenge wasn't what I needed. Accountability was. The press coverage came next. A local Charleston newspaper ran a small column under the headline, "The Officer Who Stood Still." It wasn't front-page news, it didn't trend, but people read it. It described how a decorated Army captain had faced public disgrace, false accusation, and assault without ever raising her voice. The piece ended with a single sentence that made me stop reading halfway through. In a world that rewards noise, Captain Tessa Ward proved that integrity can still speak in silence. I clipped the article and tucked it into the same drawer as Linda's notice. Not as a trophy, just a reminder. That truth, when left to breathe, finds its own audience. One evening, I drove to the edge of Charleston Harbor. The water was calm gray-blue, the air sharp with the scent of salt and rust. The old wooden pier stretched out before me, creaking under the rhythm of the tide. I walked to the end and leaned against the railing, the wind tugging gently at my uniform. The medal I'd received after the trial, reissued with ceremony, but delivered quietly, caught the last light of day and threw it back across the water. Behind me, the city hummed faintly, distant and indifferent. Ahead of me, the horizon blurred into something wider than forgiveness. For the first time, I wasn't running from Charleston or defending myself within it. I was simply there, still breathing alive. I thought of my father, of how he'd once told me that service doesn't end when you hang up the uniform, it ends when you stop believing in what it stands for. I hadn't stopped. If anything, I'd learned what belief really costs. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Sergeant Evelyn Brooks. "You inspired a lot of people, Captain." Quietly, of course. I smiled and typed back. "Good. Let's keep it that way." The sun dipped lower, the sky fading from gold to indigo. I could hear distant bells from the harbor, the low hum of ships readying for night departures. The world was moving forward, and so was I. Somewhere behind me, Linda and Madison were learning their own lessons in silence, the kind that doesn't redeem but reminds. I didn't need to witness it. I didn't need to see their apologies written in headlines or whispered through mutual friends. My forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for the part of me that had stayed frozen in fear for far too long. I straightened, adjusting my uniform jacket against the breeze. The metal on my chest glinted again, this time softer, less about glory, more about memory. There was a peace in knowing I had done nothing except stand still. No shouting, no retaliation, no elaborate revenge. Just truth, patience, and the quiet certainty that character has a longer half-life than deceit. As the last light dissolved across the water, I whispered, "Not a prayer, not a declaration, just a truth I could finally say aloud." "There are two kinds of silence," I said softly, feeling the words settle with the tide. "The one that hides fear and the one that holds peace." I touched the scar on my arm, the faint ridge that still ached when rain approached. I finally learned the difference. The wind carried the words out to sea, scattering them between the waves until they belonged to no one and everyone. Then I turned boots steady on the worn planks and walked back toward the shore. No applause followed, no cameras. Only the rhythm of the tide rising and falling like the slow heartbeat of a life reclaimed. And for the first time since the word arrest had echoed through that ballroom, I felt unburdened, not because the world had changed, but because I had.